Jezebel is a name that echoes through history, mythology, and scripture, a figure shrouded in controversy and fear. Known as a queen, a seductress, and the symbolic queen of demons, her story has captivated and haunted generations. From her rise to power as a Phoenician princess to her eventual downfall and transformation into a symbol of evil, Jezebel's legacy is as enigmatic as it is enduring. In this video, we'll explore the complete story of Jezebel, unpacking the historical, biblical, and mythical layers of one of the most infamous women in history. Jezebel's story begins long before she ascended to the throne of Israel. Born as the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of Tyre and Sidon, Jezebel was a princess of the ancient Phoenician world. Tyre was a thriving city-state, a hub of trade and seafaring that dominated the Mediterranean coast. This region, known for its economic prosperity, was also a bastion of religious devotion to the gods of the Canaanite pantheon, particularly Baal, the storm god, and Asherah, the mother goddess of fertility. Jezebel grew up in an environment of opulence and power, surrounded by the wealth and cultural sophistication of Phoenician society. Her father, Ethbaal, was not only a king but also a priest, deeply entrenched in the worship of Baal. This dual role combined political authority with spiritual influence, a tradition that would deeply shape Jezebel's worldview. From an early age, she would have been taught the rites, ceremonies, and significance of the gods her family revered. The Canaanite religion was one of fervent devotion, featuring elaborate rituals, temple sacrifices, and sacred practices meant to ensure agricultural prosperity and societal stability. As a princess, Jezebel was likely educated in languages, diplomacy, and the intricacies of governance. Phoenicia was renowned for its literacy and intellectual achievements, particularly its development of the alphabet, which influenced many subsequent cultures. This intellectual environment would have provided Jezebel with a sharp mind and a keen understanding of the political landscape around her. Her upbringing also instilled in her a deep loyalty to her religious heritage. Baal was seen not just as a deity, but as a provider of rain and fertility, essential for the survival of agrarian societies. Asherah, often portrayed as Baal's consort or a mother figure, represented life, creation, and the sustaining forces of nature. For Jezebel, these beliefs were more than dogma. They were a way of life that affirmed her place in the cosmic and social order. Jezebel's rise to prominence coincided with a period of intense political maneuvering in the ancient Near East. Tyre and Sidon, like other city-states, sought alliances to secure their economic interests and protect themselves from larger empires, such as Assyria. Ethbaal's reign was marked by shrewd diplomacy, and it was within this context that Jezebel's marriage to Ahab, the king of Israel, was arranged. The marriage was not merely a personal union, but a calculated political alliance. Israel, located at the crossroads of major trade routes, was a valuable partner for Tyre, which depended on access to inland markets. For Israel, the partnership with Tyre offered access to the Mediterranean's wealth and naval expertise. Jezebel, as a royal daughter of Tyre, was the ideal candidate to cement this alliance. However, this arrangement was more than a simple exchange of vows. Jezebel's arrival in Israel marked the beginning of a cultural and religious collision. As a princess of Tyre, she brought with her the traditions of her homeland, including her unwavering devotion to Baal and Asherah. Unlike the Israelites, who worshipped Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Jezebel's gods were part of a polytheistic tradition that many Israelites viewed with suspicion, if not outright hostility. Despite this, Jezebel likely entered Israel with confidence and ambition. Her upbringing had prepared her for the complexities of court life and the challenges of navigating a foreign culture. She would have seen herself not merely as a bride, but as an emissary of her people and her gods. Her mission, in her eyes, was not only to support her husband's reign, but also to uphold the traditions of her homeland and extend their influence into Israel. In this role, Jezebel represented the merging of two worlds: the Phoenician culture of maritime trade, wealth, and polytheistic worship, and the Israelite kingdom with its emerging monotheistic identity. The stage was set for a dramatic and contentious chapter in Israel's history, one that would see Jezebel rise to power, challenge the status quo, and ultimately become one of the most infamous figures in the ancient world. Her story, rooted in her origins as a princess of Tyre, was just beginning. Jezebel's marriage to Ahab, king of Israel, was not simply a union between two individuals, it was a significant political and cultural alliance. The marriage was orchestrated at a time when the region was a hotbed of power struggles, shifting allegiances, and economic rivalries. Israel, strategically located along vital trade routes, was emerging as a powerful kingdom in its own right, while Tyre, Jezebel's homeland, remained a dominant force in maritime commerce and diplomacy. Their union represented an opportunity to strengthen ties between these two powers, but it also set the stage for a profound cultural collision. When Jezebel arrived in Israel, she likely did so with all the pomp and ceremony befitting a Phoenician princess. The royal marriage would have been a lavish affair, symbolizing the unity of two great nations. However, beneath the surface, this union carried seeds of future conflict. Jezebel, deeply rooted in her Phoenician heritage and religious traditions, brought with her a worldview that contrasted sharply with the monotheistic faith of Yahweh that dominated Israelite society. Jezebel's arrival introduced Phoenician customs, traditions, and, most significantly, her fervent devotion to Baal and Asherah. For Jezebel, these deities were integral to the prosperity and stability of her homeland, and she saw no reason why they should not play a similar role in Israel. However, the Israelites viewed their faith in Yahweh as central to their identity and covenant with God. The introduction of foreign gods into this monotheistic framework was perceived as a threat to the spiritual and social fabric of the kingdom. Despite the potential for friction, Jezebel was not one to play a passive role in her new home. As queen, she quickly asserted her influence within Ahab's court. Ahab, for his part, seemed open to accommodating his wife's beliefs and practices, either out of political pragmatism or personal affection. Under Jezebel's guidance, temples and altars to Baal were constructed in Israel, including a grand temple in the capital city of Samaria. These acts marked the beginning of a systematic effort to integrate Phoenician religious practices into Israelite society. Jezebel's promotion of Baal worship was not merely an expression of her faith, it was also a political strategy. Baal, the god of storms and fertility, was seen as a powerful deity capable of ensuring agricultural abundance and economic prosperity. In a kingdom reliant on agriculture, Baal's favor would have seemed essential to many, particularly in times of drought or famine. By introducing and elevating Baal worship, Jezebel aimed to consolidate her influence and align Israel's fortunes with the traditions of her homeland. However, Jezebel's actions sparked deep resistance from many Israelites, particularly the prophets of Yahweh. These prophets, who served as spiritual leaders and guardians of Israel's covenant with God, viewed Jezebel's religious reforms as an existential threat. To them, her promotion of Baal worship represented idolatry and a betrayal of Israel's divine mission. This opposition was not merely theological, it was also deeply political, as the prophets often wielded significant influence over the people and their rulers. The tension between Jezebel and the prophets escalated rapidly. Jezebel, unyielding in her commitment to her beliefs, took aggressive measures to suppress dissent. She ordered the persecution of Yahweh's prophets, seeking to silence their opposition and solidify her religious reforms. Many prophets were killed or driven into hiding during this period, an act that further inflamed resentment against her. At the same time, Jezebel cultivated a network of loyalists who shared her vision for Israel's future. Her court became a hub of cultural and religious exchange, drawing advisors and officials sympathetic to Phoenician traditions. This circle of influence allowed her to maintain her position of power even as opposition to her policies grew. Ahab, though often portrayed as a willing participant in Jezebel's plans, seemed to rely on her strength and determination to navigate the complexities of his reign. The marriage between Jezebel and Ahab also highlighted the broader tensions within Israelite society. The kingdom was not a monolithic entity, but a diverse collection of tribes with varying traditions, loyalties, and religious practices. Jezebel's presence and policies exacerbated these divisions, with some viewing her as a symbol of progress and others as a dangerous foreign influence. This polarization would come to define much of Ahab's reign and lay the groundwork for the dramatic events that followed. Jezebel's marriage to Ahab was, in many ways, a microcosm of the broader cultural and political dynamics of the ancient Near East. It was a union born of strategic necessity but fraught with profound challenges. For Jezebel, it was an opportunity to extend her influence and promote the values of her homeland. For Israel, it was a moment of both opportunity and crisis as the kingdom grappled with questions of identity, faith, and power. As queen, Jezebel would continue to wield her authority with boldness and conviction, setting the stage for the defining moments of her story. Jezebel's rise as Queen of Israel was marked by her ability to wield influence with precision, power, and an unrelenting determination. In a time when women in royal courts often played secondary roles, Jezebel broke the mold, becoming an active participant in the governance of the kingdom. Her reign alongside King Ahab was characterized by ambition, prosperity, and controversy as she unapologetically pursued her vision for Israel, blending the traditions of her Phoenician heritage with the political needs of her adopted kingdom. From the outset, Jezebel positioned herself as more than just a consort. She demonstrated a keen understanding of statecraft, aligning her personal beliefs with broader political objectives. One of her primary goals was to solidify the influence of Baal, or worship in Israel, not merely as an act of personal devotion, but as a strategic move to consolidate power and unify the kingdom under a broader cultural framework. For Jezebel, Baal was not just a deity, but a symbol of stability, prosperity, and divine favor. She believed that by fostering the worship of Baal alongside her husband's rule, she could bring both spiritual and material benefits to Israel. Jezebel's efforts were not limited to the construction of temples or the introduction of rituals. She actively worked to embed Baal worship into the fabric of Israelite society. Through her patronage, she funded the establishment of priesthoods and religious festivals that celebrated Baal and Asherah. These public displays were not only acts of reverence but also statements of political power, showcasing her ability to shape the cultural landscape of the kingdom. The Grand Temple to Baal in Samaria, the capital of Israel, stood as a testament to her influence and determination. Her assertiveness in religious matters was matched by her approach to governance. Jezebel was a master manipulator of court politics, often using her authority to reward loyalists and eliminate threats. She cultivated a network of allies within the royal court, including officials, advisors, and priests who shared her vision or benefited from her patronage. This network allowed her to extend her reach beyond the confines of traditional queenship, making her an active participant in decision-making processes. One of the most controversial aspects of Jezebel's reign was her persecution of the prophets of Yahweh. To Jezebel, these prophets represented not only a religious opposition, but a political challenge to her authority. They were vocal critics of her policies and sought to uphold the covenant between Yahweh and the Israelites, a covenant that Jezebel's religious reforms seemed to violate. Her response was swift and ruthless. Under her orders, many prophets were killed or driven into exile. This campaign of suppression further cemented her reputation as a tyrant in the eyes of her detractors. However, Jezebel was not universally despised during her reign. To some, especially those who benefited from the economic prosperity of her policies, she was a strong and capable leader. The introduction of Phoenician trade networks and the wealth that came with them brought a degree of stability and growth to Israel. Her rule also saw advancements in infrastructure and the arts, reflecting the cultural sophistication of her Phoenician roots. These achievements earned her the loyalty of certain factions within the kingdom, even as others viewed her as a dangerous interloper. The infamous story of Naboth's vineyard is often cited as the epitome of Jezebel's ruthlessness and her willingness to bend the rules to achieve her goals. When King Ahab expressed his desire to acquire a vineyard owned by a man named Naboth, the latter refused, citing the inheritance laws of Israel that prohibited him from selling his ancestral land. Ahab, disheartened, returned to the palace, but Jezebel saw this as an opportunity to assert her authority. Jezebel orchestrated a scheme to frame Naboth for blasphemy and treason. She forged letters in Ahab's name, instructing the elders of Naboth's town to accuse him of cursing God and the king. Naboth was falsely convicted and stoned to death, allowing Ahab to seize the vineyard. This act of injustice shocked many and further fueled the resentment against Jezebel. To her critics, it was a clear demonstration of her disregard for Israelite laws and her willingness to use deceit and violence to achieve her ends. Despite the controversies surrounding her, Jezebel's influence on Ahab was undeniable. The king, often portrayed as a weaker figure in contrast to his formidable wife, seemed to rely on her decisiveness and political acumen. Together, they ruled over a kingdom that, while internally divided, was experiencing a period of relative strength and prosperity. However, their reign also sowed the seeds of future conflict, as Jezebel's actions and policies alienated key factions within the kingdom and solidified her status as a polarizing figure. Jezebel's rise as queen was a testament to her ambition, intelligence, and determination. She was a woman who refused to be confined by the limitations of her time, asserting her authority in a male-dominated world and reshaping the course of Israel's history. Yet her unyielding pursuit of power and her disregard for the traditions and beliefs of her adopted kingdom ensured that her legacy would be marked by both admiration and condemnation. Her story during this period of her life is one of bold ambition, calculated strategy, and the inevitable clash of values that would define her reign. Jezebel's reign as queen faced mounting resistance as her influence over Israel deepened. While she and Ahab enjoyed periods of prosperity, the seeds of rebellion and divine judgment were sown during their rule, culminating in a series of dramatic events that led to Jezebel's downfall. This chapter of her story is marked by political intrigue, prophetic confrontation, and her ultimate gruesome demise. The prophet Elijah emerged as one of Jezebel's most formidable adversaries. A fiery and uncompromising figure, Elijah was a champion of Yahweh, determined to confront the growing influence of Baal worship in Israel. He was not only a spiritual leader, but also a voice of resistance against Jezebel's policies and Ahab's complacency. The tension between Elijah and Jezebel epitomized the clash between two competing worldviews, one rooted in the covenant of Yahweh and the other in Jezebel's vision of a kingdom unified under her gods. The confrontation reached its apex on Mount Carmel, where Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to a dramatic showdown. In this event, Elijah called for the people of Israel to witness the power of their God versus the power of Baal. The terms were simple: the deity who answered with fire to consume the sacrifice would be declared the true God. Jezebel's prophets, numbering 450, prayed, chanted, and performed rituals throughout the day, but no fire came from Baal. In contrast, Elijah's single prayer to Yahweh brought down fire from the heavens, consuming the sacrifice, the altar, and even the surrounding water. This public humiliation of Baal's priests and the decisive display of Yahweh's power sparked a temporary rebellion against Jezebel's religious reforms. Elijah ordered the execution of the prophets of Baal, an act that enraged Jezebel. Furious and unrepentant, she vowed to kill Elijah, declaring that his life would end as those of her prophets had. Elijah, fearing for his life, fled into the wilderness, a testament to the queen's far-reaching power and the fear she instilled in her enemies. Despite the setback at Mount Carmel, Jezebel continued to assert her authority. Her grip on power seemed unshaken, but cracks were beginning to form within the kingdom. Ahab's growing weakness and Jezebel's unrelenting ambition alienated many of their subjects, including influential military leaders and political factions. The growing dissatisfaction created a volatile atmosphere ripe for rebellion. Ahab's death marked a turning point in Jezebel's fortunes. According to biblical accounts, Ahab was killed in battle during a campaign against the Arameans, fulfilling a prophecy delivered by Elijah that his blood would be licked by dogs at the site of Naboth's vineyard. Jezebel, now widowed, retained significant influence as the queen mother, guiding her sons Ahaziah and later Joram-Jehoram as they ascended to the throne. However, her power was increasingly challenged as opposition to her dynasty grew. The rise of Jehu, a military commander anointed by the prophet Elisha to overthrow Jezebel's dynasty, marked the beginning of the end. Jehu's rebellion was swift and ruthless. He was a man on a divine mission, determined to eradicate the house of Ahab and cleanse Israel of Baal worship. With the support of his troops and the backing of Yahweh's prophets, Jehu marched toward Jezreel, the city where Jezebel resided. As Jehu approached, Jezebel prepared for her final act of defiance. Refusing to flee or surrender, she dressed herself in regal attire, painted her eyes, and arranged her hair, presenting herself as a queen even in the face of certain death. Her actions were a calculated display of dignity and defiance, a final assertion of her identity and power. When Jehu arrived, she confronted him from the window of her palace, accusing him of treachery and invoking the memory of Zimri, a previous usurper who had assassinated a king. Jehu, unmoved by her defiance, ordered her servants to throw her from the window. In an act of betrayal, they complied, casting Jezebel to her death. Her body was trampled by Jehu's chariot and left in the street. When his men later returned to bury her, as befitted a queen, they found only her skull, hands and feet. Dogs had devoured the rest, fulfilling the grim prophecy of Elijah that Jezebel's body would be consumed by dogs, leaving no trace of her. Jezebel's death marked the end of her dynasty and the culmination of years of tension and rebellion. However, her influence did not die with her. She had left an indelible mark on Israel, shaping its politics, culture, and religious landscape. Her name became synonymous with treachery, seduction, and idolatry, solidifying her legacy as one of history's most infamous figures. Her downfall was not merely the result of external forces, but also the culmination of her unyielding ambition and refusal to compromise. Jezebel lived and ruled on her terms, challenging the norms of her time and wielding power with an audacity that few women of her era dared to display. Yet, her story also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the consequences of defying deeply entrenched societal and spiritual traditions. It is this complex interplay of power, defiance, and tragedy that ensures Jezebel's story remains both compelling and cautionary to this day. The legacy of Jezebel did not end with her death. In fact, her name and story transcended the historical and biblical accounts of her life, evolving into a symbol of evil, seduction, and idolatry that has endured for millennia. Over time, Jezebel was transformed from a historical queen into a mythological and archetypal figure, a process that reflected the cultural, religious, and societal values of the people who retold her story. In the biblical narrative, Jezebel was not merely condemned for her actions, but was also vilified as a representation of everything that opposed the covenantal faith of Yahweh. Her introduction of Baal worship and persecution of Yahweh's prophets placed her at odds with the foundational principles of Israelite identity. As subsequent generations interpreted and expanded upon her story, she became a personification of rebellion against God. Her name was invoked in prophetic literature, including the New Testament's Book of Revelation, where she is described as a false prophetess leading others into idolatry and immorality. This reference cemented her place as a cautionary figure within the Christian tradition. The development of Jezebel's legacy in later traditions reflects the ways in which historical figures can become larger-than-life symbols. By the medieval period, she was no longer remembered solely as a historical queen, but as a powerful archetype of the dangerous woman, a seductress who lured men away from righteousness, and a schemer who wielded power through manipulation and deceit. In this context, her story took on an allegorical dimension, serving as a moral lesson about the consequences of defying religious and societal norms. Jezebel's association with seduction and sexual immorality became a particularly prominent theme in later interpretations. While the biblical account does not emphasize her sexuality, later traditions and cultural retellings portrayed her as a femme fatale. This transformation likely reflected broader anxieties about women who defied traditional roles or wielded power in unconventional ways. Jezebel's unapologetic assertiveness and influence became a cautionary example of what could happen when women stepped outside the boundaries of submissive behavior, and her name was invoked to warn against such transgressions. In folklore and demonology, Jezebel's story took on an even more sinister dimension. Over time, she became associated with demonic entities and was even referred to as the Queen of Demons in some traditions. This evolution reflects the tendency of cultures to mythologize and demonize powerful figures who challenge the status quo. Jezebel's image as a demonic figure encapsulated fears of spiritual corruption and moral decay, casting her not just as an opponent of Yahweh, but as an enduring threat to the spiritual health of humanity. Jezebel's name also entered the lexicon as a term for morally corrupt or manipulative women. This linguistic legacy is evident in phrases such as painted Jezebel, which evokes her final act of defiance when she adorned herself before confronting Jehu. This act, originally intended as a demonstration of her dignity and power, was reinterpreted as a symbol of vanity and deceit. Her story became a shorthand for warning against perceived moral and spiritual failings, particularly in women. Despite the overwhelmingly negative portrayal of Jezebel, in many traditions, modern interpretations have sought to reassess her legacy. Some scholars and writers argue that Jezebel was a victim of cultural bias and a patriarchal narrative that sought to vilify powerful women. From this perspective, her actions can be seen as those of a politically savvy leader who sought to protect her religious and cultural identity in a hostile environment. Her resistance to the dominant religious traditions of Israel might be understood as an assertion of her own autonomy and the values of her Phoenician heritage. Feminist reinterpretations of Jezebel's story highlight her intelligence, ambition, and resilience. They argue that her vilification reflects a broader historical pattern of demonizing women who wield power or challenge traditional gender roles. Jezebel's story is thus reframed as a tale of a woman who refused to be confined by the expectations of her time, a narrative that resonates with contemporary discussions about gender, power, and representation. Jezebel's influence also extends into popular culture, where her name and image continue to evoke fascination and controversy. She has been portrayed in literature, art, theater, and film, often as a complex and multifaceted character. But whether depicted as a villain, a tragic figure, or a misunderstood heroine, Jezebel's story has proven to be endlessly adaptable, reflecting the values and concerns of the societies that retell it. Her legacy is further complicated by the enduring power of her name. In some circles, calling someone a Jezebel remains a potent insult, laden with historical and cultural connotations. Yet for others, Jezebel represents a figure of defiance and strength, a symbol of a woman who dared to claim authority in a world that sought to silence her. Ultimately, the story of Jezebel transcends the specifics of her life and reign, becoming a mirror for the fears, values, and aspirations of the cultures that remember her. She is a reminder of the power of narrative to shape legacies and a testament to the enduring complexity of historical figures. Whether viewed as a queen, a villain, a victim, or a myth, Jezebel remains one of history's most compelling and enigmatic figures, a symbol of the struggle between power, faith, and identity.